Okay, we're starting Be'ez Hashem a new mimer now, mimer lashon hakodesh, and this is really a tshuva that he's going to say he wrote to Pinchas Hirschsprung.
Who's that?
Rav of Montreal, very famous person who was a baki in every sefer in the world. So let's read inside. Heyois, all the Sfarim begin with Heyois. Hakdama, the mimer Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, and the mimer lashon hakodesh all begin with the word Heyois. Interesting. Heyois, since ki b'ma'amorim ho'ela. In the other two Ma'amorim, Shalosh Shavuos and Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, misbarim kama inyanim legalos pnei haloit shemislabshim atziyonim. That this, a lot of the things in this sefer are coming to not just to show that Zionis is wrong, but also to reveal the truth behind the mask that the Tzionim put on when they try to show, look, we love Eretz Yisrael, we want to do the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. So that was the Ma'amar Yishuv Eretz Yisrael to explain the truth behind that. And now we're going to a new one to explain the truth behind this idea of speaking Hebrew that the Tzionim have adopted. So let's see. Not just the Tzionim themselves, but also the religious Zionists who follow them. Lahasis ulahadiach b'malbushay kedusha, to bring Yidden off the derech using the clothing of kedusha. K'moy chibu v'Eretz Yisrael, like loving Eretz Yisrael, v'avas Yisrael, and loving every Jew, v'aschalta de geula, and claiming that their movement is the beginning of geula. Kohena v'kohena shemos nidafim. Many other synonyms, words that are used by them constantly, l'samoy soinaim, to blind the eye. V'echad mi'yesod sehem, and one of the foundation stones of Zionism is hu shemagdilim achiv l'daber b'lashon hakodesh, that they exaggerate the need and the requirement to speak in lashon hakodesh. There is such a thing as lashon hakodesh. You have to learn lashon hakodesh to understand all the Heilig Sfarim, but they exaggerate the need to learn it and to speak in it. V'reshes zu tamnu lahem. This is their net that they have cast. Lispois levavos b'nei Yisrael l'lshonim atameh shakra'uhu ivrit. So it starts out by saying, okay, let's teach everybody lashon hakodesh in school in America, let's say, but it leads to speaking the lashon hatameh, which is ivrit, which is not really lashon hakodesh. It's a language that's created on its own. Therefore, I'm copying here another tshuva. Shekasavti Rav Agoin Amafursam, Morenu Rav Pinchas Hirschsprung Shlita in Montreal. Pinchas Hirschsprung was an amazing person. He learned in Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin, the Rebbe Shapiro's yeshiva in Lublin.
Is this one of the builders of Torah Montreal?
Yeah, and when he came in the 40s, right the beginning of the war, he escaped from Europe and he came to Montreal. He knew, every sefer he ever learned Baal Peh. He had a photographic memory. He was famous for that. Anyway, so he wrote a letter to the Rebbe asking him to clarify this issue of speaking lashon hakodesh in schools, because there's a big issue. I mean, it still is that the schools teach lashon hakodesh, and they teach it as a speech. They teach it as a spoken language too, not just to learn the types of words, but they actually in girls' schools they actually do speak to the girls in Hebrew. So oidos inyan shel lashon hakodesh, and I think that Reb Pinchas founded a Beis Yaakov school in Montreal. I think that might have to do with it also. I'm going to try to get the original letter. I haven't succeeded in finding the letter yet, but the letter that he sent to the Rebbe, I'm trying to find. Okay, anyway, oidos inyan shel lashon hakodesh. This is regarding the tshuva that was written regarding the subject of speaking lashon hakodesh. Kol hamisbar bazeh b'shas u'poiskim. All the different sources on this. Davar alafanov. Everything that was everything arranged in order. V'hoisafti katzas hoisafos nechutzos. And now that I'm coming to print it, I added on some interesting ideas to it. Be'ezim mekayman, be'soich hatshuva, in different places in the midst of this letter. Asher helasam mitzudasi ko'eis b'shashim mastarti b'leveis hatvus. Things that I found while I was preparing it for print. Hashem yisborach yeh b'yazreinu. May Hashem help us l'chavin elo emes, to come to the true psak. V'yizkadosh Shem Shemayim al yadeinu. And the name of Shemayim should be a Kiddush Hashem.
I get more changes.
Yeah, sure. So starting Siman Aleph. Hinei be'ikar halimud shel lashon hakodesh af levanim v'loy levanos. That to teach kids, the idea of teaching kids lashon hakodesh. Let's go to the sources in Chazal and see what it's about. Now he says here loy lavanos because later on he's going to speak about banos. Banos.
Well, sadly, they know my Hebrew well. So
but banos, we're not even talking about that one here. We're just talking about here in America if you should have Hebrew in the schools.
Right.
So for banos, the Rebbe's shita is like the Hungarian gedolim of his time that girls should not learn any Hebrew. It's a very interesting shita. It's going lifnim and shoyz adin. Meikar adin, girls aren't allowed to learn Torah Shabbat Peh. But they are allowed to learn Torah Shebiksav. And therefore you could teach them Chumash, you could teach them the Taich of Chumash, you just can't teach them the Mefarshim on Chumash.
Or Hebrew or the dictum of Hebrew.
And the Gemara.
And Hebrew, because then the dictum
so that's not so pasha. If you're going to teach them Chumash, you got to teach them how to understand Chumash. So how to understand Chumash, you need diktuk. So there's no issur to teach a girl diktuk in Hebrew. However, the Rebbe's shita was that the Hungarian Rabbanim, Hungarian Gedolim, were makabel an extra mile on this. Not only not to teach girls lashon Torah Shabbat Peh, but not to teach them Hebrew because Hebrew might lead to them getting to understand Torah Shabbat Peh. So they were makabel like a gzeira, like a takana.
Okay. The seminaries, they're so messed up.
But in other schools, they weren't makabel this chumrah, and they teach girls the Hebrew, and they teach them to understand at least Torah Shebiksav. In Satmar schools, the girls are only taught in Yiddish. There's no Hebrew chumash there. They learn the chumash, but they learn the story of the chumash.
Yeah, it's not like what's Chaim possible. Yeah.
Anyway, but here he's clarifying that all this, what we're going to speak about until that point, is only for boys. So now, Kvoi Torasa Harama Ner Yair. The Reb Pinchas Hirschsprung in his question, Hera Makim, he pointed out 3 marmakomis. The Pirsha Mishnayis La Rambam. We're going to see in a second. Shechashvoi La Mitzvah Kala. That he considers learning Hebrew to be a mitzvah kala, a small mitzvah. We're going to talk about it. V'chein Hera Makim LiYushalmi V'Sifri. 2 other marmakomis that seem to consider learning lashon hakodesh a mitzvah. So before we even go any further, let's just see these 3 marmakomis. Number 1, Pirsha Mishnayis the Rambam Perek Beis of Masechta Avos. It says, Rabbi Omer Ezehui Derech Yishara Shiyaver Lo Adam Kol Shehi Tiferes Lo Yisel V'Tiferes Lo Min Adam V'Heve Zahir B'Mitzvah Kala Kifa Chamura. Be careful with a small mitzvah just as you would be with a severe mitzvah. Because you don't know how much schar HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives for each mitzvah. Zok the Rambam, a mitzvah that you think that it's small, like being happy on the Shalosh Regalim, ulamidas lashon hakodesh, and learning lashon hakodesh. Just like a mitzvah that you know is a severe mitzvah. Shehi gedola, kamila, v'tzitzis, u'shchitas ha-pesach. Okay? And then he says, V'sam siba zeh she'ena ta yodea matan scharan shal mitzvahs, u'bir zeh o'in ka'asher oimer, v'hu sha'atoya kula mimena mitzvahs aseh, mitzvahs lois aseh. And he's marich here to explain what the idea is, why why we don't know what the schar of a mitzvah is. Now, but you see the Rambam calls it a mitzvah. Okay? Turn to the next page here. The Yerushalmi Shabbos Perek Aleph, Daf Testament Aleph. It says, Tani b'shem Reb Meir, Kol mi shehu kavua be'Eretz Yisrael. Anyone who lives in Eretz Yisrael, v'oichel chulav b'tahara, and he eats all his food b'tahara, u'medaber b'lashon hakodesh, and he speaks Hebrew. For koirei eshma b'boker b'erev, he says Kriya Shema twice a day. Muftach lo shehu mechai ha'olam haba. He's going to get olam haba. Okay, that's the Yerushalmi. And the Korban Ho'eda says from Medaber b'lashon hakodesh shegoyreim taharas hanefesh. It causes purity of the soul to speak lashon hakodesh. Pasha, you could say the Pshat is Yerushalmi Shabbos Perek Aleph, Daf Testament Aleph. That we're gonna. I don't. You might speak about this later, but the real lashon hakodesh, not the Zionist language, has only pure words in it, only good words, only concepts that Yidden are supposed to think about. Right. It doesn't have treifa words.
Right.
So if you speak lashon hakodesh, you're limiting your mind, because your language is limited. Your mind is limited to speak only about pure things, to think about pure things.
Right.
Your mind influences your thoughts.
Yeah.
Shenken Ivrit, of course, it's the other way around. Took every shmutz from every Goyish language in the world and incorporated it into Hebrew. Okay, and the third Maramakam is the Sifri. Sifri on Parshas Ekev, and this is on the mitzvah V'limad temoisam es b'nechem l'daber bam. Okay, so the Sifri V'limad temoisam es b'nechem l'daber bam b'nechem v'loy b'noisechem. Your sons and not your daughters. You don't teach Torah to your daughters. Divrei Rabbi Yossi ben Akavya. That's the words of Rabbi Yossi ben Akavya. L'daber bam mikan amru. When the tinok begins to speak, baby begins to speak, his father speaks to him in Hebrew, and he teaches him Torah. If he doesn't speak to him in Hebrew, it's as if he buried him. It's like it's like a punishment will happen to him. To speak of them, Laman Yirbu Yimechem. It says afterwards, Laman Yirbu Yimechem. You should have long lives. Im Limad Temoisem Yirbu Yimechem. Then you'll have long lives. V'imei V'nechem. V'im Lav. But if not, then Yikratzu Yimechem. The lives will be cut short. Chas v'shalom. Shekach Divrei Torah. Nidrashim Miklal Lav Ata Shemei Hein. Or Miklal Hein Lav. You can imply the opposite. You can infer the opposite from whatever it says. That's the Sifri. Okay, now let's take a look at Vayom Moshe inside. I want to explain this Indian a little bit. This is what the Sifri says. We just learned it inside. Okay. So here Chazal say it in a slightly different language. They say Chazal speak. The father speaks to his son, and he teaches him Torah and Kriya Shema. Torah Mahi. What does it mean by Torah? Torah Tziv and Moshe. Torah doesn't mean all Torah. It means that pasuk Torah Tziv and Moshe. Kriya Shema Mahi pasuk Rishon. Teach them the first pasuk of Kriya Shema. U'v'tosefta Chagiga Perak Aleph. Kosfu. Chazal say in a third version of the Memra, they say like this: Yodei l'daber, when the baby learns to speak, Avi malamdoi Shema, v'Torah, v'lashon hakodesh. All three things: Shema, Torah, Tzivon, Moshe, lashon hakodesh. A different order, right? Nimtze shemem rezu hi begimel makaymis b'divrei Chazal. This Memra is in three places: in the Sifri, in the Gemara Sukkah, and in the Tosefta Chagiga. B'shinuyim, and there's differences between them. In the Sifri, hishmit kriyishma. It leaves out kriyishma. It just says teach him lashon hakodesh and Torah. V'lai kasav lashon hakodesh v'Torah. With Brisa Gemara, the Gemara Sukkah daf mem beis hishmit lashon hakodesh. Doesn't mention anything about teaching in Hebrew. V'lai kasav Torah kriyishma. Over Tosefta kasav hakol. Tosefta says all three things: kriyishma, Torah, and lashon hakodesh in that order. Remember the order because we're going to speak about it.
The first one is repeat.
Repeating, it says in the Sifri, it says teach him lashon hakodesh and Torah, not Kriya Shema.
Yeah.
In the Gemara, it says teach him Kriya Shema and Torah, but not lashon hakodesh.
Yeah.
And in the Tosefta, it says all three.
In the order of
Kriya Shema first, Torah, and lastly lashon hakodesh.
Yeah.
Okay. Aval Shino Haseder. The Rebbe points out here. He was Mashana the order. Shabbos Sifri Kasav Li Mulashon HaKodesh Batchila. The Sifri says first learn Hebrew and then learn Torah. Uva Tosefta Kasav L'Vasoif. Tosefta it says first learn Torah and then learn Hebrew. Okay. V'hinei Masha Hishmit b'Sifri. So let's go to the first question. Why does the Sifri leave out Kriya Shema? Masha Hishmit b'Sifri Kriya Shema Yesh Loimar. With Pshitas, we could say a very simple teretz. The Sifri loy mayri ela mi'achiv deraisa. The Sifri is talking what chiyuvim does the father have mideraisa on his son. So training a son in mitzvahs is not a deraisa; it's a derabbanan.
Right,
so to teach him Kriya Shema is so that he could do the mitzvah of Kriya Shema. That's like teaching him how to hold a lulav, teaching him how to blow shofar. It's chinuch. Chinuch is a derabbanan. Sifri is not talking about derabanan. Sifri is talking about deraisis, and therefore, shari lamdoi mikrada v'limad temoisam misbenechem. It's learning it out from a pasuk. It must be a deraisa, and therefore it only says the things that are deraisa, which is Torah and lashon hakodesh is a prerequisite to Torah. It's something that you need in order to learn Torah, but not Kriya Shema. Uvazayis Ranan me'Magen Avram. The Magen Avram wrote a pirush on the Yalkut, al Yalkut, right? And it's called Zayis Ranan. It's printed in the Yalkut, except that this Zayis Ranan that he's quoting here is not printed in the regular Yalkuts. You have to get a separate sefer Zayis Ranan for this. Yeah. But he says, Pirush b'masha amru mikan amru. He explains the Sifri like this. The Sifri is quoted in the Yalkut, and he explains it. Mikan amru hava mina sheyilmod livnoi Kriya Shema. That you would have thought that the v'limad temoisam is talking about Kriya Shema. After all, it's in the parsha of Kriya Shema, isn't it? Yeah. So you might have thought that, teach him to speak of it b'shachbecha uvkumecha b'shivtecha b'veisecha like Kriya Shema. First, the Sifri darshan is that it's only your sons, not your daughters. So therefore, we had a kasha, we had a problem. Lamali miyuta. What do you have to have a miyut of girls from Kriya Shema? Mitzvah saseish azman gramahu v'nashim beturais.
What was saying just now?
That he's explaining the Sifri. The Sifri has two parts to it.
Yeah.
It says when the pasuk says v'limadtem oisam is b'neichem v'loy b'noiseichem, and the second part is that mikan amru, from this they said, based on the fact that it's boys not girls, they said that when the teenage starts to speak, you teach him Torah and lashon hakodesh.
Yeah.
So the question is, what do these two parts have to do with each other? Yeah. What does boys not girls have to do with teaching in Torah? Zok the Zayis Ranan, Magen Avram, that the connection is like this: that if not for the fact that it says B'neichem v'lo b'noiseichem, I would say it's going on Kriya Shema, because Kriya Shema is that parsha there. Yeah. But now that it says a miyut of girls, so now I have to ask a question: what do I need a miyut for? Girls are anyway parted from mitzvahs saseish azman grama. I'm not going to train my daughter to say Kriya Shema, because she never has to say Kriya Shema even when she grows up. So what's the point of teaching her Kriya Shema? Elakaya Torah. Therefore, it's going back on the Torah, and it's saying, teach him Torah. L'chein amar mikan amru l'lamdoi Torah. Therefore, it says mikan amru. From this we learn that you teach your son Torah. Okay. V'harei midakasav b'neichem v'lo b'noiseichem al koch d'leikoi al Kriya Shema. It's not going on Kriya Shema ela al Torah. So really, the Magen Avram and the Rebbe are getting to the same destination in two different ways. The Rebbe is getting there by saying the pasuk is only talking about deraisis. The Magen Avram is willing to tolerate that the pasuk is talking about derabbanans, but he says once you see b'neichem v'lo b'noiseichem, you know it's not talking about Kriya Shema, because Kriya Shema, there's no derabbanan to teach her Kriya Shema, because she's never going to be chayav in Kriya Shema. Nor of us, it's going on Torah and lashon hakodesh. Yeah. So they're both coming to the same conclusion. But now that there's no learning out, there's no place where you learn out from the pasuk. It's only a place to teach your son Torah, but not Kriya Shema. I guess if it would have been Kriya Shema, then we would have said it to mitzvah deraisa to be mechanech your son in Kriya Shema. Not like all the other chinuchs that's derabbanan. But now that it's not, Al Kriya Shema hi kamoi shar mitzvahs. It's like any other mitzvah. Shachi b'chinuchu rak midrab nivreim. It's only the derabbanan to teach your son to do lulav and shofar and Kriya Shema. Uvesifri loy chashav sham shum mitzvah shechayev b'chinuch. It doesn't list any other mitzvah that you chayev in chinuch there. Ela Torah. Torah is a deraisa, right? To teach your son Torah is not chinuch; it's deraisa. It's only the Rabbanan to teach him mitzvahs, but to teach him Torah when he's a cotton, that's chinuch deraisa.
Yes, that everyone agrees.
The Ma'iri rak milimud akra. It's only talking about the pasuk that you learn out from the pasuk, whatever to do. Avol b'brais there should be Gemara, but in Sukkah Daf Mem Beis, chashav gam lulav ushar mitzvahs. It mentions when your son's ready to shake a lulav, you give him a lulav, right? That's the Rabbanan. So the Gemara is not learning out from any psukim. The Gemara is just saying, what's the chiyuv chinuch that the Rabbanan shtel devek? The chiyuv to buy your son a lulav and to buy him tzitzis and to and all ushar mitzvah shechayev b'chinuch. Upirish Rashi zal sham shechayev l'chanchu b'divreim. It's the Rabbanan. V'chein chashav gam Kriya Shema. That's why the Gemara mentions Kriya Shema. So basically, to sum it up, we took care of one kasha so far.
The first one was?
The Sifri mentions only Torah and lashon hakodesh. Yeah. The Gemara mentions Kriya Shema and Torah, but not lashon hakodesh. Yeah, so the question, and the Sefta mentions all three. Yeah. So the question was, there are many questions, but one of the questions was, why does the Sifri omit Kriya Shema.
Yeah.
So we just took care of that problem. Kriya Shema because it's not talking about chinuch; it's only talking about deraisa.
Yeah.
Uve kedushin dav chav tes gavi mitzvahs haben alav. There's a Mishnah in Kedushin that talks about all the mitzvahs that a father has to do for his son. Shechayev lamula, he has to do bris milah. V'liv doisa, he has to do pidin ben. Ulam doy Torah, teach him Torah. Ulasiyoi isha, and he has to marry him off a wife. Sham loy chashav loy kriya shema v'loy shum mitzvah shechayev b'chinuch. There, the Mishnah doesn't list any mitzvah that's chinuch. In Sukkah, it's talking about the mitzvah of chinuch, the Rabbanan. So it lists lulav and it lists kriya shema. Mashenkin over here in Kedushin, we're talking about deraisas. So Sham loy chashav is talking about bris milah, pidin ben, things that deraisa. So therefore, loy chashav loy kriya shema v'loy shum mitzvah shechayev b'chinuch ki loy chashav sham elamash nilmoid mikrai. It only lists things that are learned from psukim. K'mavur sham b'gemara. U'mash chashav b'sifri limud lashon hakodesh. So now to the second question: why does the sifri list learning lashon hakodesh? What mitzvah deraisa is that? Where do you see from the pasuk that you have to teach the language? So you have to say according to this shita, meaning the shita of, I guess, the Zayis Ranon, or maybe the shita of the Sifri. The Sifri holds the kivan sheyadias halashon. Since knowing Hebrew is he toyelis the limud Torah, it will help you learn Torah. The alidesha mevin halashon, because you understand the language, mevin yoiser Torah, you'll understand the Torah better. You won't have to read it in the translation. Yeah. So you understand maksiv ba. L'chein chashvay b'chlal limud Torah. It includes it in the mitzvah of learning Torah, of teaching Torah. U'v'chumash Torah Tamima, in the Torah Tamima by Rabbi Baruch Levi Epstein, Torah Tamima, right? Cost of the Nilmoid Mikra. Yeah. Cost of the Nilmoid Mikra, the Melashon L'daber Bam. He says it's not just that it's a svara. The Rebbe is saying it's a svara, that to teach Hebrew is part of teaching Torah. Yeah. He says more than that. It's not just a svara. It's L'daber Bam Darash, the Sifri Darshans, Shagama Dibur B'lashon HaKodesh He mitzvah. That speaking Hebrew is also a mitzvah. Aval B'Re'im, Rebellion Eliyahu Mizrachi, Pirshan Rashi, Uvegur Arya, Parashas Ekev, Uvepnei Yeshua, Kedushin Daf Chavtes. All three of these Akronim say, Mevur de Milashon L'daber Bam Darshu L'Shiyura. They darshan from the words of L'daber Bam. How old does the son have to be to teach him Torah? The Mishash Yodea Haben L'daber Bam, to speak of them. How do you know when to start teaching your son Torah? Maybe you start when he's a month old. No, you wait till he learns to speak. Yeah. That's when the chiv is chal on the father to start teaching him the Torah. So according to them, l'daber bam is not going on Hebrew; it's going on Torah. So how does the Sifri know that you're supposed to speak Hebrew with him? So that the reason why the Sifri says to speak Hebrew is because it's a svara, that to understand the Torah you got to know Hebrew. Now take a look at the Torah Tamima inside. I thought it was interesting to see. He says like this: Ois nun beis. It's going on Parashas Ekev. Ois nun beis. Halashon mikan amru. The words mikan amru that you have to speak lashon hakodesh near the rumas roimes lamashkas of sukkah daf mem beis tan rabbanan katna yedei l'daber aviv malamdoi Torah krishma v'chaser ha de medaber imoy b'lashon hakodesh. That the Gemara leaves out lashon hakodesh, like the Rebbe pointed out. Aval b'tosef the reish perakav de chagiga isa. It brings all three. Aviv malamdoi shma v'Torah b'lashon hakodesh. V'near the gam b'gemara tzarich loymar kain. So the Torah Tamima says he wants to make a Hagah in the Gemara. He wants to say, the Gemara is the Girsa is wrong. It should say Lashon HaKodesh in the Gemara. That's the Torah Tamima, or Baruch Epstein. Yeah. He wants to answer that the Gemara it's a mistake in the Girsa. It's supposed to say Lashon HaKodesh in the Gemara too.
Instead of what?
Instead of just Kriya Shema and Torah.
Really? He
wants to stick in what we find that the Sifri and the Tosefta both say it, so he wants to stick it into the Gemara too. The Tam Hadiyuk. He says now, this is what the Rebbe quoted, Milashon l'daber bam, nir mishum de lefia pshat ha'yitzarech lo'emar v'hagisa bam. Why does it say l'daber bam? Why doesn't it say v'hagisa bam? Which is think about them. V'lachein darish degama dibur atzma mitzvah. Because if you're learning Torah in, let's say, Yiddish or English, you're not really speaking the words of the Torah. You're speaking other words that remind you of Torah and they make you think about Torah, but they're not actual words of Torah. So therefore, the Daber Bam tells you the Dibur itself is a mitzvah. V'hainu adibur b'lashon hakodesh. V'tam adavar nir pasuk k'dei sheyavin mashi daber b'kriyish ma v'Torah. So you should understand what you're saying. Kvar kasavnu. Interesting. The Torah's Mima says he wrote a sefer on this subject. Kvar kasavnu ma'amar miyuchad b'chiv v'mailas limud lashon hakodesh, about learning Hebrew. Kranuhu b'shem safa la'ne'emanim. Varsha taf reish nun gimel. He wrote it in 1893 when he was pretty young. V'hirchavnu sham adibur b'chol nogei l'inyan zeh. And I'm not going to read the whole thing inside, but he speaks here about a steer in the Rambam. He says the Rambam, when he talks about teaching Torah to your son, he doesn't mention Hebrew. And the Rambam in Pirush Mishnayos that we quoted before, in Perek Beis Ta'avos, does mention it. Steer in the Rambam, and he says, in the end, the last little paragraph here on the next page, he says, V'ulai sfir le, de'ena mitzvah zuna heges rak be'eretz Yisrael. It could be, the Rambam held, that the mitzvah only applies in Eretz Yisrael. Uve'esh Yisrael shruim al mosam, Hashenkin bil galuseinu shehu davar she'i yefsher. Because during Galus it's impossible to speak Hebrew, l'roiv hatzibur, for most people. La moed boy mikama taimim, because they're speaking other languages. It's difficult, so therefore they weren't mechayev it then. That's what the Torah Tamim wants to answer. So I don't know how that answers the question, because Lamai said the Rambam, the Rambam was writing his sefer for all generations, not just for Galus. So why in the Rambam Yad Chazaka, why doesn't he bring the mitzvah to speak in lashon hakodesh? But that's the Torah Tamim's answer. And one more paragraph for Siman Aleph, okay? V'al kapanim ma shehishmit b'sifri kriyishma. That the Sifri leaves out Kriyishma zeh muvan heitev. That we understand.
Not direction.
Right. Amamasha hishmit b'shas lashon hakodesh. This that the Gemara leaves out lashon hakodesh. V'lo zachrei mu'uma. It doesn't mention it at all. Sarchiyun. That we have to understand. L'choyer b'may pligi ma Sifri v'tosefta. What's the machlokes between the Gemara and the other things, the Tosefta and the Sifri? Umasha Kosav Kvoid Torasoi. This the Reb Pinchas Hirschsprung, Neri Yair. He wanted to answer up the steer like this: Liashiv Shatali beplukta the Rebbe Rabbanan. That it depends on the machlokes in Kriyish Ma b'lashon hakodesh or b'chol lashon. The machlokes in the second parak of brachos. If Kriyish Ma is, can you say Kriyish Ma in English, or you have to say it after lashon hakodesh? What? So basically, Reb Pinchas wanted to say this is the teretz for the Sifri and the Gemara, that the Gemara doesn't bring lashon hakodesh because the Gemara holds like the Rabbanan that you could say Kriyish Ma in any language. So there's no point in teaching your son lashon hakodesh. You could teach him any language because he'll be able to say Kriyish Ma in any language. Hashenkin, according to the Rebbe holds Kriyish Ma is in lashon hakodesh davka. Then you got to teach him lashon hakodesh. Okay. So on that the Rebbe responds. He says, "Hinei adrabba nafoichu." On the contrary, Shabbat Shekasav Lashon HaKodesh Hishmit Kriyish Ma. We just got through saying the Sifri is not even talking about Kriyish Ma. So it's not talking about training your son for the mitzvah saseh of Kriyish Ma, which is Chinuch D'Rabbanan. It's not talking about that because it leaves it out. So you can't say the reason why the Sifri said Lashon HaKodesh is because it holds like Rebbe, so you could prepare your son in order to understand what he says when he says Kriyish Ma. Doesn't even mention Kriyish Ma there. Okay? Hishmit Kriyish Ma Gamri. Uv Gemara, in the Gemara Sukkah, Shechashav Kriyish Ma, the Gemara does mention Kriyish Ma, Hishmit Lashon HaKodesh. So it's like the opposite of what Reb Pinchas wanted to say. So Alma the Lashon HaKodesh Einoi B'Shvil Kriyish Ma. You see that Lashon HaKodesh is not for the sake of knowing how to say Kriyish Ma. Ela B'Shvil Torah. It's for the sake of learning Torah.
And besides,
the Yoiser Nitzrach, you need more Havanas Halashon. You need to understand the language better. Bishvil Kol Torah Kula, when you learn Torah. Why should Tzricha Havana? You have to understand what you're saying. Bishvil Kriyish Ma. Kriyish Ma, you don't need to know Hebrew so well. Shemitzad Adinim like Kiven El Pasuk Rishon Bilvad Yatsa. Kriyish Ma, you just need to know the first pasuk. So basically, two arguments against Reb Pinchas Hirschsprung's answer. Number one argument is that the Sifri, he can't say the reason why the Sifri lists Lashon HaKodesh is in order to say Kriyish Ma, because it doesn't even mention Kriyish Ma there. And number two, you don't really need Lashon HaKodesh so much for Kriyish Ma. You really mainly need it for Torah. So you can't say that it's totally in the Machlokes Rebbe and the Rabbanan. So in the coming Simanim we're going to have to answer why the Gemara left out Lashon HaKodesh.